Welcome to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm Mira Rubin, your host, and today I am honored to introduce Dr. Jude Currivan, cosmologist, planetary healer, futurist, and award-winning author, whose work bridges the profound wisdom of ancient traditions with the frontiers of modern science, integrating the scientific with the spiritual, the ancient with the cutting edge, and the personal with the planetary. Jude's background is both academic and deeply spiritual, shaped by a lifelong quest to understand the nature of reality. With a master's in physics from Oxford University and a PhD in archaeology from the University of Reading, she's studied the cosmos from the quantum level to the ancient wisdom encoded in the Earth's history. Transcending academic titles, her wisdom comes from lived experiences in over 80 countries, learning from indigenous elders and immersing herself in the sacred knowledge of our ancestors. Beyond her scientific and spiritual pursuits, Jude's expertise extends into the business world, where she was once one of the most senior women in the UK's corporate sector, blending strategic vision with pragmatic leadership. Her visionary work, co-founding Whole World View, brings life to her true mission, empowering humanity with a unified, evidence-based worldview that supports the healing of our planet and the elevation of our collective consciousness. Her recent work, including the 2024 short documentary, A Radical Guide to Reality, invites us to see through the lens of interconnectedness, to perceive a world that's not fragmented, but one vibrant whole, waiting for us to step into a more sustainable, conscious future. Jude, I am so thrilled to have you here with us today. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Mira. Thank you so much. I'm delighted. I'm so excited by our conversation and what an amazing time for us to come together, because the world is both in such turmoil, but, I think both of us also perceive a world of such opportunity and potential.
So your hopefulness is one of the most remarkable and powerful things, given your broad knowledge base, your interdisciplinary knowledge. Your hopefulness is something that I think is so essential. It's manna for the soul, I think. And I want to dig in a bit to where that comes from. And I have a bunch of questions, so I'm just going to name a few things that I want to cover in this conversation. But the fact that you so effectively bridge the spiritual and the scientific, and with incredible credibility, and you have a way of bringing these worlds together that people can respect and absorb. And you've gotten your bones, so to speak, in traditional business as well, which probably has contributed greatly to your voice. So can you just help us understand how you've created that bridge and what it's like for you experientially to be walking in multiple worlds?
Thank you, Mira. And I guess our journeys are our journeys. And So for me, walking between worlds and bridging and it's just my journey. So it's not something that I've Kierkegaard once said, the amazing Danish philosopher Joran Kierkegaard once said, we experience life forwards and understand it backwards. So my life forwards has been a sort of a scenic route of all that you described. And yet that scenic route has never felt fragmented. It's just felt that onward journey of, for me, curiosity. Curiosity, my mum used to say, is my middle name, and why was my biggest word. So it's been a journey of curiosity that continues to this day and discovery. And one of the joys that I have is sharing those discoveries with others, not in any way as an imposition, but as an invitation, and hearing others' journeys, such as your own, and realizing that all our journeys are unique to each of us, and yet they're part of a common path that we as humanity and we as our planetary home and we as our universe have been on, in case of our universe, for nearly 14 billion years. So my curiosity has been to understand that entire journey and what it means for us. Who are we as human beings? What is our community of life within what I now describe as a living and loving universe? And how does that affect the way we make our decisions and choices and behaviors? So my work interweaves all of those, because for me, it's first of all the why, and then the how, and then the what for. So all of those now are coming into this time that, some are describing as metacrisis. But the reason that I am hopeful is from all of those paths and all of those steps, I am seeing this as a time of metamorphosis for humanity. And the turbulence remains, when you're in a metamorphosis and you've been the caterpillar, the disillusion is real, the turbulence is real, the loss of perceived identity of what we thought we were is real. And yet what that process is, that emergent evolutionary process is about, is literally emerging and evolving to new ways of seeing the world, being in the world. So instead of being a caterpillar, my reframing of these times is as a metamorphosis for the emergence of us as a human butterfly. So that's my hope, and that's my life really has come to this point that I can stand on this and share from this point and share from this perspective and invite others into this adventure.
I'm in. I accept the invitation.
I'm so happy.
You make a very compelling case for this transformation, and you really are shifting paradigms. You're on a very fundamental level, moving us from a place of separation and mechanistic thinking into one of unified thinking and consciousness. Yeah.
Very much so, but and perhaps absolutely. And yet to emphasize that unity is not uniformity. Unity, our entire universe indeed meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves as a unitive entity. And as we know, when we look outside and we look on the leaves of a tree or a snowflake, when we look into the world, we see extraordinary diversity. And so that is, for me, foundational, that the unity is expressed in diversity. And even beyond that, because we now understand, as the ancients did, as indigenous traditions have taught us, that we are inseparable and interdependent, not even just interconnected, but interdependent with the entirety of our universe. And we belong. We belong. We are foundational members of its communities of life. So this understanding, it seems to me, is an invitation to this incredible adventure that awaits us if we, like you, we say yes to this.
The notion of belonging creates, in and of itself, creates a foundational shift, because then we have a connection. We have a connection to something beyond ourselves. And then that connection radiates out, propagates outward. Something that there are a lot of things that fascinate me so much about you, Jude, because you have found yourself in very traditional circles and very institutional circles, even and have been and are very well respected within those circles. And yet, I'm going to say it this way, yet you have experiences and have had since you were a child that most people would look at with more than skepticism, with disbelief. And I'm wondering how you navigate that, because you're transparent about it.
Yeah, why wouldn't I be?
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. Well, you wouldn't be, because there's social ramifications and judgments and projections in our culture that says these things can't be. So I'm wondering how it is for you and how you manage to transcend those prejudices.
I love the question, and I'm not really sure how to answer it because I never took any notice of them.
That may be the answer.
I never took it. Well, first of all, I've been incredibly fortunate, Mira. First of all, I had a wonderful mother, and she didn't know that I was walking between worlds to the extent that I was from when I was 4 years old. But she taught me something that, regardless, she said, first of all, do the right thing. What you consider to be the right thing, do it, regardless of the cost. And that is such a rider. It is such a rider to that guidance. Do what you feel is right, regardless of the cost. And that is so deep in me. Secondly, she also said that only I can make my decisions. Nobody can make them for me. Yeah, ultimately, they're mine to make. Thirdly, that I can't change anybody's mind, whatever they think about me, and all of us, whatever other people think. She said, don't worry about that. She said, if you show up, get out of the way of your ego, serve something that is greater than you are, it is the whole world, and just take that path. And so I've been incredibly fortunate. I've been in very, very, very few circumstances when I've heard the sort of responses that you're describing. And maybe I'm just blind and deaf to them, but I don't think I am. I just feel that when somebody is authentic within themselves, you may disagree with them, but often I feel in some way, you share their choice to be authentic. So that's been my journey. And now I find, and I found this for the last 30 or 40 years, that, first of all, I was never special. I have never been special. We're all special. But also I find more and more people, actually, they may not have shared their stories, but they still have them. And many, many people, I would say, because this is natural to who we are, have the sort of experiences that I've had. And so perhaps for us, you and I, both of us, to be transparent in our journey and to share it not from a place of imposition, but share it as fellow human beings, I hope offers and invites that sharing with and from others.
I think you were very fortunate. I was othered
Were you?
for
Yeah,
my experiences, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and also told, oh, that's just your imagination, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And I think that that's something that's quite common for people.
it is. It is. I agree.
And it also gives people reticence to be sharing, because people then I have been dismissed because, oh, you're just
Yeah.
woo-woo or whatever. And something that I deeply admire about what you have accomplished, even though it was so natural, probably because you just were so accepting of it. When you brought that forward, nobody challenged it, right? So
No,
you created.
absolutely. And I think the other thing as well, and I know you have done this too, is that I was very good at what I did in the corporate
Yes.
world. I was really grounded. I was really that, and I was really good at what I did. And so I gained that credibility, and I was able to sort of gain credibility in other areas of my endeavors that sort of, I think, helped people to give me the benefit of the doubt, as it were.
Yeah.
And so when I was able to share and felt to share, there was at least a willingness to say, oh, maybe, just maybe. And now, of course, what I'm delighted for is the scientific evidence of what I mentioned earlier of unitive reality. The Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022 was given on the basis that our entire universe is unitive, and the Nobel's only given for settled science. So, I almost challenge somebody to find a scientist that doesn't sort of now take this as read. And they may sort of disagree with the details and all of that. But, the Nobel Prize was given because this is now understood as being settled science.
So this is a perfect segue into talking about evidence-based information, because so many people that are listening, I think it would be a nice idea, aren't aware of the settled science of it. And I would be really grateful if you could share some of that with us so that we could have a richer understanding.
I'll be delighted to. And to be fair, it's only recently got to this point of the level of evidence is so powerful now. And also, sometimes you get a piece of evidence at one scale. It may be the atomic scale, or it may be a planetary scale, or it may be a cosmological scale. But this evidence that I'll share what the conclusions are or the implications are of this evidence, we're finding it at all scales of existence, from the tiniest to the whole universe. And we're also discovering the same patterns that underpin this understanding, that are all pervasive to support this understanding across many different fields of research. So we find the patterns and the evidence at all scales, but also cosmologists are discovering this, quantum physicists are, meteorologists are, the folks that study the weather patterns are, planetary scientists are, evolutionary biologists are, and crucially, neuroscientists are, that discover, that research human cognition and consciousness, and systems researchers are. And these are folks who look at whole systems, and they're realizing that the evidence is showing this interdependent unity, not only in what we might call natural systems, such as ecosystems or weather patterns or whatever, and at all scales, from atomic to planetary to solar systems to galaxies to the whole universe. But we're seeing them through human systems too. In other words, as King Charles recently said, we cannot any longer see ourselves apart from nature, because we are part of nature. We are part of this extraordinary, wonderful creation of a universe. So I'll stop there in case you have any questions, but
Well,
I'd love to
yes,
share some of that evidence.
so you've created the context to say this exists on all levels. It's undeniable. But scientific information often takes a while to funnel into the cultural norm. So if you could give specifics of examples, that would be so wonderful.
I'll be delighted to. Well, first of all, I just want to take a quick step back as to why science has continued a worldview or maintained a worldview of separation, materialism and separation. And I think the reason for that is that the worldview that science had come to by the mid-late 19th century was a worldview of a mechanistic universe, a universe of things, separate things that work brilliantly together, but nonetheless, separate things. And due to its origins way back in the 16th, 17th century, where the authority of the church forbade any investigations that went beyond the physical realm. It was like you can look at the physical world, but don't you dare go anywhere near spiritual realms, because that's our purview. As a result, science and spirituality undertook these sort of divergent paths, and yet they were grounded in the same reality. It was just different perspectives of the nature of what that was. And the further we go back into history and prehistory, we see that the ancients understood, and what they had was a sacred science of a living universe. Yeah, and indigenous traditions have seen us as being part of the web of life. So this modern, and it is modern, it's a tiny fraction of our human journey, the last few hundred years, arose by folks not wanting to be held by the superstitions of the church, which were then very prevalent. They wanted to go out and investigate and test and experiment, but they were only allowed to do so on the level of the physical world. And that was why the science and methodology, which is very powerful in terms of experimentation and replication and the theory and the evidence dancing together going forward, went forward, but it wasn't allowed to go deeper into other realms. It wasn't allowed to go into the realms of spirituality or consciousness or the nature of consciousness. So by the mid-19th, late 19th century, it had come up through that route with a mechanistic understanding of a material and a material universe made up of separate things. Now, the key there was that was at its height. Its technologies drove the Industrial Revolution. So that was so powerful. It was far more than a revolution of science. An industrial revolution was a revolution of society. And so what got carried into the Industrial Revolution was this worldview. And the focus is on more and more technologies, more and more, the economic system driven from this mechanistic perspective. That's continued. It's continued for over 100 years. So all the science that has been discovered since then was subjugated to technology. And yet the deeper awakenings, the deeper discoveries, for example, of quantum physics and relativity theory, which was that we're not separate. That when we observe something, we cannot separate an observer from that which is observed. The way we measure it shows up as what we see, but not the underlying reality of it. That mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They're literally what we and the whole world are. All those clues were, pretty, unless they serve technology, were pushed to the side. But science has a great way eventually, Mira, of getting to a point where the evidence is so overwhelming that it can't be held within the limits of the worldview that becomes outdated, because that evidence it's literally like a pan of boiling water. The water just goes into steam and boils over, and the pan can't contain it. So that old paradigm can no longer contain what is being discovered. So what is now being discovered is that the appearance of our universe, its energy and matter, and its space and time are real, but they are its appearance. They themselves emerge from deeper levels of universal intelligence and causation. And as that does so, they also manifest in what's termed holographically, which is that our whole universe is being seen as a cosmic hologram, where its manifested appearance is projected as universal consciousness. from its boundary that we call the boundary of space. This is what all the evidence is pointing to. And it seems crazy. I know it seems crazy.
So I actually took time to listen to other interviews with you. And I heard you have this conversation about the holographic universe and the event horizon. And the thing is that I think I know what a holograph is. I mean, I've seen them, and I have been told that it's through splitting a light wave,
Mhm.
but I'm not connecting the dots, and I'm particularly not connecting the dots when you talk about our universe being a reflection, it being a holograph or a hologram.
Okay, let's go back then. You're absolutely right. And this is why I feel that this is fundamental, because this is really what this direction of travel is. All the evidence is supporting what I've just shared. Okay.
And
There
now
isn't a
I would just
single.
want to tease apart what it means, because
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's tease that apart. First of all, I think it's important to just take that step back to what I said, that the appearance of our universe is real. And the science of the 20th century, the quantum physics and the relativity physics, describe energy matter, quantized energy matter, and non-quantized space-time. That was wonderful. That was a major step forward. Now, though,
can I keep interrupting you for clarification?
of course you can. Of course you
Thank
can.
you. So when you say quantized, just so
Yeah.
people understand what you mean, quantized space-time, quantized,
No, quantized energy matter.
okay.
Okay. Space-time we've discovered is not quantized. It doesn't need to be. Doesn't
Okay.
need to be. Doesn't need to be. And there's a reason for that. Let's go back to the first discovery of quantum physics, because this is key to all that followed. Somebody wanted to know about hot ovens, as you do, because the 19th century physics suggested that the energy, the heat, the energy radiated from a hot oven should be infinite. Okay. And clearly it isn't, at least not in my kitchen. So that the
Which is a good
scientists,
thing.
which is a really, really good thing, an important thing. So the scientists said, why is that not the case? And the reason it's not is that all energy is actually not continuous, but actually occurs in tiny little packets called quanta. Quantum just means packet. So it's rather like music is made up of notes, okay? Music is not made up of a continuous set of frequencies. It's notes that embody specific frequencies or energy, because energy and frequencies is obviously combined or correlated. So because energy is quantized, it meant that energy comes in little packets of notes, which means that it is much easier then to combine in atoms, because energy and matter is equivalent, which is what Einstein said, E equals mc squared, the great, the most famous equation in the world. Energy and matter is equivalent through the speed of light, c squared. So the point then is, by quantizing energy matter, it means that the relationships between energy and matter can be rather like music. So we can say that the entire universe is made up of music. Yeah, it's made up of quantized energy matter, and all their notes create the atoms and the molecules and the stars and the planets and the plants and the people. So we could not be here if energy and matter was just continuous. It would be a grey gloop. It would be a grey gloop. It would not be differentiated, such as music needs notes to differentiate itself. And the silence between the notes are a part of it too. So our universe has these wonderful notes of energy matter that we call quantized. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
does that help with the
A
quantized?
lot. That's wonderful.
Okay. So let's now go on to space-time, and a really important point. Space-time doesn't need to be quantized because it's doing a different job. Quantized energy matter is the differentiation of the wholeness of the universe into its parts, into its constituent parts, from atoms upwards. Yeah? Space and time has another job. If quantized energy matter is how our universe exists, yeah, and relates to itself in its unity and diversity, then what space-time does, it's the container for that existence and experience. And so when we go back to the beginning of our universe, space was tiny. It was so tiny. It was as tiny as it's ever been. And time was at its first moment. From that first moment, 14 billion years ago nearly, space has expanded and time has flowed forward. Now what that does, space is the container. As it's expanded, it's enabled ever more experience, ever more information to actually be manifest, embodied in our universe as time has flowed forward. So space-time, just as energy and matter work together, space and time work together. Space to expand through time, time to flow forward. That enables our universe to evolve.
I have to ask you, because I've heard the theory and sort of ascribed to the theory that anything that ever could be, ever was, ever will be, already has happened, already exists. No.
I would say no. And from everything we know about the way our universe comes together, and to be honest, it's a lovely thought, and it actually does go back. I mean, Einstein came up with this idea of the block, what's called the block universe, which is actually a deterministic universe. And one of his, I think, blind spots, and there were very, very few, was that he really didn't like the idea of quantum physics. He really didn't like, and he really didn't understand an evolving universe. He passed over before the understanding that our universe had a finite beginning came into general acceptance. So he didn't know that our universe began 13.8 billion years ago, which is the best evidence we now have. And he didn't know that it began in its tiniest state at the first moment of time. He didn't know anything about what we would call the Big Bang. And he didn't know that I would then restate it because it was so exquisitely fine-tuned, so perfectly ordered, that enabled this whole evolutionary journey to go forward, that rather than described as a Big Bang with the implied chaos, I describe it as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And that big breath is about space expanding and time flowing. So that block universe, that deterministic, that everything had been, yes, everything that's been on that journey so far is held on the holographic boundary of what we call space. But we are at the bow wave of this ongoing, unfolding, emergent process that is not yet written. The laws of physics say the same, because they're the algorithms that enable this whole life cycle, this whole flow from simplicity to complexity, that holds sort of space and time and energy and matter in that wholeness to flow. But the beauty is that what we call the future is yet to be written in the sense of the evolution of consciousness.
So the question that I have, that I've always had, is how does it even begin? You know, whether it's a Big Bang or whatever, what precedes that?
Absolutely.
There needs to be a something from which, or a vast pregnant nothing from which a something emerges.
I love the vast pregnant nothing. The best I can respond, and I'm responding from, a spiritual being having a human experience here, as we all are, is that what Einstein actually called cosmic mind, what all traditions, spiritually based traditions, call the infinite, eternal mind of the cosmos, God, Allah, great mystery, great spirit.
Yeah.
That is the infinity and eternity of what it seems to me as humans we can touch in those most profound moments. And as spiritual beings, I feel we have a lot more access to that understanding. But just coming back to here and now and you and I and this experience, what we now understand, and it is evidence-based, first of all, is that our universe is finite. It began a finite time ago. It will now likely complete a finite time in the future. Everything in it is finite, and yet it is birthed from infinity, birthed from eternity. And so I describe it as, and I'm not the first by any means, probably ancient wisdom, but Sir James Jeans talked of this in the Edwardian era. He said, our universe is more like a great thought than a great thing. So going back to that vast, pregnant, the cosmos actually having a thought that is a universe. And perhaps
I think of it as God knowing itself, whatever.
I love it. I love it because without that differentiation, how can that wholeness? And the I Ching talks about this. In the beginning is one. The one becomes two. The two becomes three. 10,000, then 10,000 things are born. And so the original oneness, if we expand it beyond our universe to the entire cosmos, then that universe is God beginning in a universe or many, many universes to experience what it's like to differentiate that wholeness within the two-ness, the three-ness, the yin and the yangness of it, the ether, the pingala, the shushumna of it. And from that 10,000 things are born. And so that is my sense of it. And when we say what was before our universe, we've got some inklings that our universe may have been born from previous universes. And there's a whole lot of sciencey stuff that I could go into, but that we could be birthed through other universes. So if we talk about reincarnation, this is reincarnation of universes.
Mm.
That's a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe each one of those universes is a thought.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
An emergent thought. Yeah.
An emergent thought. And our universe is so incredibly fine-tuned and exquisitely so and perfectly ordered, not just to exist, as I mentioned, but to evolve. That, if that fine-tuning had been out, I think Lee Smolin identified it as like 1 part in 10 to the 27. That's 1,000 trillion trillion. 1 part in 1,000 trillion trillion. Different. And there are other, measurements of that, but it's big. Then, it wouldn't have even got past the first second, let alone into stars and planetary systems and plants and people.
So oh boy, I can see where we could talk forever. For sure. We haven't even gotten to the description of the hologram, but what I'm thinking is that when we talk about our universe, and consciousness, it's almost like the only thing that makes sense is that everything is consciousness.
Yes, exactly. And that is exactly what the evidence is showing us, that the appearance of our universe, its energy, matter, space, time, is actually not only emerging from deeper realms of discount beyond physicality, of causation and intelligence, but the way it does so is why the holographic perspective has gained such traction. It does so in the form of meaningful, this is the key word, information. And just as our telecommunications technologies use digitized information, ones and zeros, that of themselves have no meaning, but when we put them together in long streams, they spell out Mira and Jude, and they enable us to have this conversation by converting our words into those streams of ones and zeros to then go through the technology and then be recreated as meaningful words for us. We're finding that at the foundation of our universe is digitized, meaningful information that then accumulates as its energy matter. as its atoms and stars and people. So this is why our technologists, it's really fascinating for me,
So
because our
can
technologists are opening the guidance to this.
can you bring us into a more concrete example of a proof of evidence
Yeah.
that
Okay, so let me go back to what I was saying about the evidence at all scales of existence, and not just in if you like, natural natural examples, but human collective behaviors. When we look, for example, at an ecosystem, we can analyze all of the information that describes that ecosystem. And let's take we could take an ecosystem, we can take a weather pattern, both are the same underlying. We can take all of the information points that describe the ecosystem, the shape of the leaves, the way that the leaves are on the plants and the plants are with the soil and they connect together. We can describe it. We can take masses, vast amounts of information around that ecosystem. And then when we model it in computers, we find that there are underlying patterns of information that reveal the relationships that play out throughout the ecosystem. And when we do that, we can find that those patterns actually show up in incredible ways that are not only relational, but that they scale up and they scale down. So we see two things coming out of this. One is something called fractals, which you mentioned earlier. And if folks would like to Google fractals, they'll get a much more beautiful visual way of seeing this work. But fractals we find at every scale of existence. We find fractal patterns in the way electrons in atoms cluster when an atom does what's called a phase transition from being a metal to being an insulator. We find them at that scale. We find fractals, you look at a leaf frond of a fern, and we can scale in and we can see fractals as we scale in and then scale back. We see fractals pervading ecosystems. When we look at clouds, we look at the outlines of clouds, and that's a fractal pattern. We look at we look at planetary systems, and rivers arrange themselves in fractal patterns. Mountain ranges, their heights and their breadths and their volumes arrange themselves in fractal patterns. We go out beyond our planetary home and we look at our solar system, and we find that the what's called the solar wind, which is these sort of particles that are radiated by our sun, they stream out in fractal patterns. We go out into the galaxy and we see the way that the galaxies are organized in fractal patterns. We literally go out to the whole of space. And around 380,000 years after the beginning of our universe, it began very, very hot. But as space expanded and time flowed, it cooled down. And when it was very, very hot, it was not transparent to light, but it was to sound. The music began. The music began right from the get-go. But after 380,000 years, space had cooled. And when that happened, it became transparent to light. But that radiation, that light from that very, very earliest epoch of our universe, then as our space expanded, continued to expand because it was the whole of space. And the wavelengths expanded to the microwave level that they are now. So what we have is something called the cosmic microwave background, which is this relic radiation, now in microwave frequencies and wavelengths, that fill the whole of space. And when we map it, which is being done, we see tiny temperature fluctuations throughout it. And when we analyze those, we see the fractal patterns within them. So
wow.
this is what I mean. This is the scaling up. So fractals scale up and scale down, and we see that those fractal patterns are the appearance that emerge from underlying what are called holotropic attractor patterns, and these are all of the informational sort of underpinnings from which the appearance of complex systems like ecosystems emerge. but we see the same underlying attractor patterns, underlying, for example, not only ecosystems, but we find they underlie the internet as well. When we look at relationships, which, are relational in terms of frequency and power, called power laws, which are also part of this, this incredible geometry of relationships. When we plot the incidence, the frequencies of, say, earthquakes against their destructive power on a graph, we find there's no such thing as an average earthquake. Instead, we find when we plot thousands of earthquakes along this graph of frequency and destructive power, they array along a straight line. So there's one relationship that joins all earthquakes. The frequency of an earthquake is related to its destructive power. So the stronger the earthquake, the less frequent it is. Now, when we do the same with human conflicts, wars, regional insurgencies, local hissy fits, many thousands have been and analysed in terms of their frequency and their destructive power in terms of fatalities, human fatalities, through world wars and before that, 300 years, through to insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we plot them on a graph. Guess what? It's the same relationship as for earthquakes. In other words, there is one relationship for human conflicts. The frequency of a human conflict is related to its destructive power. The greater the destruction, the less frequent. But nonetheless, they are interdependently interrelated, just as earthquakes are. So the underlying attractor pattern is the level of universal and planetary and human consciousness, all as fractals within the whole at a certain point or through a certain period of time. So if we have the consciousness that is the attractor pattern that still plays out in conflicts, we have the ability to heal the traumas that come from a dis-ease of separation, to consciously evolve, where our underlying collective attractor pattern of consciousness naturally emerges in peaceful societies.
You brought things around to just a most beautiful bow. I so appreciate that, and I wanted to ask, how does this relate to sustainability in our future? And you took us there without my needing to ask. So I appreciate that so much. And I see that our time is coming to a close. It went by in no time for me, and I have so many more questions. But in the meantime, uh, is there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked?
No, you are absolutely amazing, as you are. But one thing that's coming forward very powerfully now, and we've sort of tippy-toed around it, and we've finally come to the perspective that the evidence shows us that we can no longer not come to the perspective that mind and consciousness isn't something we have. It's what we and the whole world are. But beyond that, I would say that our foundation and the universe's foundation is one of love. Because our universe, is not just a living universe, but for me, the definition of love at that level is that its wholeness, its unity is expressed through profound interdependence and right relationship, as the indigenous traditions teach us, reciprocity, balance, right relationships. So I speak of a living and loving universe. And it seems to me that we can take universal love with all the evidence that I've just touched on today to show us that by us understanding that we belong with each other and to it and with it, that we can find ways of really stepping into this embodiment of love. So I'm working on with a dear friend and colleague, Grant Story, something called the science of unitive love or soul. And so what this is an invitation to know that we belong, feel the big breath of our universe breathing through us in each moment, and knowing that we are loved, and that at our most profound foundation, we are love.
Thank you. Thank you. And that our interconnection is undeniable.
It's undeniable.
Yeah. Ooh, thank you so much for that. So you have written a number of books. You have the website. Can you provide us with the URL, the way to find you, how to learn more about your work?
Thank you, Mira. And you mentioned it, I co-founded Whole World View in 2017 to literally serve the understanding, experiencing, embodying of unitive awareness. So the website is www.whole, W-H-O-L-E, world, W-O-R-L-D, -view, VIEW.org. There's loads of links and free resources and invitations to adventure. And we've got the link to the film you mentioned, A Radical Guide to Reality, on there, but that's on YouTube. It's free to watch, free to share, available in 20 subtitled languages. And this is not the YouTube algorithm that gives you the sort of the 80% translation. It's every translation has been provided by natural speakers of that language who understand the thing. And it's an invitation, a short 14-minute invitation for young people and truth seekers of all ages to say yes to this adventure.
And it's a beautiful film. So I encourage everybody to go check it out. Jude, thank you so much for your vision, your generosity. Hearing you speak it's pure poetry. And I'm very, very grateful that you have shared this time with us. I also want to say thank you to all our listeners and those who are supporting us on Patreon, carrying the torch. We so appreciate you. And also thank you to my partner in Sustainability Now, Scott Billy, who's also our producer. And that's it for today. Live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.